They never knew where them bones come from. The old woman was crazy, known to be so. That was my brother in that casket, and he was a minstrel dancer out of Cincinnati, Ohio, shot to death over a woman, and other protests until the judge raised both hands for silence. Wait now, he said, for there's a rider to the tale. There was a young bride waiting for that traveler, with whose bones we are acquainted, and she bore a child in her womb that was that traveler's son. Now this son, whose father's existence in this world is historical and speculative and, before the son has entered it, is in a bad way. All his life he carries before him the idol of imperfection to which he can never attain. The father dead has euchred the son out of his patrimony, for it is the death of the father to which the son is entitled, and to which he is heir, more so than his goods. He will not hear of the small, mean ways that tempered the man in life. He will not see him struggling in follies of his own devising. No, the world which he inherits bears him false witness. He is broken before a frozen God, and he will never find his way. What is true of one man, said the judge, is true of many. The people who once lived here erected the Anasazi, the old ones. They quit these parts, rooted by drought or disease, or by wandering bands of marauders, quit these parts ages. Since and of them there is no memory. They are rumors and ghosts in this land, and they are much revered. The tools, the art, the building these things stand in judgment on the latter races, yet there is nothing for them to grapple with. The old ones are gone, like phantoms, and the savages wander these canyons to the sound of an ancient laughter. In their crude huts they crouch in darkness and listen to the fear seeping out of the rock. All progressions from a higher to a lower order are marked by ruins, and Mr. Yen, a residue of nameless rage. So, here are the dead greater than fathers. Their spirit is entombed in thus tone. It lies upon the land with the same weight and the same ubiquity. For whoever makes a shelter of reeds and hides has joined his spirit to the common destiny of creatures, and he will subside back into the primal mud with scarcely a cry. But who builds in stone seeks to alter the structure of the universe, and so it was with these masons, however primitive their works may seem to us. None spoke. The judge sat half naked and sweating, for all the night was cool. At length, the experienced Tobin looked up. It strikes me, he said, that either son is equal in the way of disadvantage. So what is the way off raising a child? At a young age, said the judge, they should be put in a pit with wild dogs. They should be set tapazel out from their proper clues, the one of 3 doors that does not harbor wild lions. They should be made to run naked in the desert until... Hold now, said Tobin. The question was put in all earnestness, and the answer, said the judge, if God meant to interfere in the degeneracy of mankind, would not have done so by now. Wolves call themselves man. What other creature could? An ist race of man not more predacious yet. The way of the world is to bloom and to flower, Andy. But in the affairs of men, there is no waning, and the noon of his expression signals the onset of night. His spirit is exhausted at the peak of its achievement. His meridian is at once his darkening and the evening of his day. He loves games. Let him play for stakes. This you see her, these ruins wondered at by tribes of savages. Do you not think that this will be again? I dot and again, with other people, with other sons. The judge looked about him. He was sat before the fire naked save for his breeches, and his shawls rested palm down upon his knees. His eyes were empty slots. None among the company harbored any notion as to what this attitude implied. Yet so like an icon was he in his sitting that they grew cautious and spoke with circumspection among themselves, as if they would not waken something that had better been left sleeping. The following evening, as they rode up onto the western rim, they lost one of the mules. It went skittering off down the canyon wall, with the contents of the panniers exploding soundlessly in hot, dry air, and it fell through sunlight and through shade, turning in that lonely void until it fell from sight into a sink of cold blue space that absolved it forever of memory in the mind. O feiny, living thing that was. Glanton sat his horse and studied the adamantine deep beneath him. Erevan had set forth from the cliffs far below to wheel and croak. In the acute light, the sheer stone wall wore strange contours, and the horsemen on that promontory seemed very small, evento themselves. Glanton looked upward, briefly, as if there were anything to ascertain in that perfect china sky, and then he chucked up his horse, and they rode on. Crossing the high mesas in the days to follow, they began to come upon burned-out pits in Thegrin, where the Indians had cooked mezcal, and they rode through strange forests of maguey, the aloe or century plant with immense flowering, stalks that rose 40 feet into the desert air. Each dawn, as they saddled their horses, they watched the pale mountains to the north, and to fewest for any trace of smoke. There was none. The scouts would be already gone, riding out in the dark before the sun rose, and they would not return until night, reckoning out the camp in thought in coordinate waste by palest starlight, or in blackness absolute where the company sat among the rocks without fire, or bread, or camaraderie any more than banded apes. They crouched in silence, eating raw meat the Delawares had killed on the plain with arrows, and they slept among the bones. A lobe-shaped moon rose over the black shapes of the mountains dimming out the eastern stars, and along the nearby ridge the white blooms of flowering yuccas moved in the wind. And in the night, bats came from some nether part of the world to stand on leather wings like dark satanic hummingbirds and feed at the mouths of those flowers. Farther along the ridge, and slightly elevated on a ledge of sandstone, squatted the judge, pale and V-necked. He raised his hand, and the bats flared in confusion, and then he lowered it, and sat as before, and soon they were feeding again. Glanton would not turn back. His calculations concerning the enemy included every duplicity. He spoke of ambushes. Even he, in all his pride, could not have believed that a company of 19 men had evacuated an area of 10,000 square miles of every living human. 2 days later, when the scouts returned in the middle of the afternoon and reported finding the patchy villages abandoned, he would not ride in. They camped on the mesa and made false fire sand lay all night with their rifles on that stony heath. In the morning they caught up the horse sand, descended into a wild valley strewn with grass huts and the remains of old cook fires. They dismounted and moved among the shelters, frail structures of saplings and weeds, stuck into the ground and bent, two at the top, to form a rounded hovel over which a few rags of hide or old blankets remained. The grounds were strewn with bones and nappings of flint or quartzite. Anthe found pieces of jars and old baskets and broken stone mortar and rifts of dried bean pods from the mesquite, and a child's straw doll, and a primitive one-stringed fiddy that had been crushed, and a part of a necklace of dried melon seeds. The hovel doors were waist-high and faced the east, and few of the shelters were tall enough Tobe stood in. The last one that Glanton and David Brown entered was defended by a large and vicious dog. Brown drew his belt pistol, but Glanton stopped him. He dropped to one knee and spoke to the animal. It crouched against the rear wall of the hogan and bared its teeth and swung its head from side to side, the ears flattened alongside its skull. "He'll bite you," said Brown. "Get me a piece of jerky." He crouched, talking to the dog. The dog watched him. "You want man, that son of a bitch," said Brown. "I can man anything that eats. Get me a piece of jerky." When Brown came back with the dried meat, the dog was looking about uneasily. When they rode west out of the canyon, it was trotting with a slight limp at the heels of Glanton's horse. They followed an old stone trail up out of the valley and through a high pass, the mulas clambering along the ledges like goats. Glanton led his horse and called after the others. And yet darkness overtook them, and they were benighted in that place, strung out along a fault in through of the gorge. He led them, cursing upward through the profoundest dark, but the way grew so narrow, and the footing so treacherous they were obliged to halt. The Delawares came back foot, having left their horses at the top of the pass, and Glanton threatened to shoot them all where they attacked in that place. They passed the night, each man at the feet of his horse where it stood in the trail between a sheer rise and a sheer fall. Glanton sat at the head of the column with his guns laid out before him. He watched the dog. In the morning they rose and went on, picking up the other scouts and their horses at the top of the pass and sending them on again. They rode through the mountains all that day, and if Glanton slept, none saw him do so. The Delawares had reckoned the village empty 10 days, and the Galinos had decamped in small bands by every egress. There was no trail to follow. The company rode on through the mountains single file. The scouts were gone for 2 days. On the third day they rode into camp with their horses all but ruined. That morning they'd seen fires atop a thin blue mesa 50 miles to the south.